So I've literally just finished watching the Panorama on the Married at First Sight UK. And I have a few thoughts, probably quite controversial, but I'm just going to say my piece on it because I feel like as a woman, it's really important to do so. So the three participants that have rape allegations have very different stories, which goes back to the fact that rape is a very unique set of circumstances. And basically, you have a classic representation of rape in that sense, and then you have more complicated cases. What is very interesting is I think that this topic has already sparked debate. I think people have kind of said, these people have gone onto this show. What did they expect? There also is a lot of people who feel like because there's muddying of the waters where these participants had consensual sex, that diminishes what happened. If you've given consensual sex once, you've always given it is a weird warped belief that people have. People also weirdly think that if you are in a relationship, for example, in this experiment, they are meant to be married. They're not literally married, but until fairly recently, it was legally allowed in this country to rape your wife because she was your property. Some people still have the belief that if you are in a relationship, there is no such thing as rape. And then it's an interesting level of the differences. So the middle example was a very kind of clear rape situation that was starting to escalate. And then the other two girls, Shona in particular, has a really interesting story because it talks about the nuances. So one of the other ladies had a situation where she'd given consent and then he'd asked her for sex and she'd said no, and he continued, and then he kind of realised that she was just not participating, and then he was like, no, you're making me feel like a rapist. And Shona's situation was one in which she said that he basically ejaculated without her consent inside of her. And these are really interesting things because I think we have traditional perceptions of rape. We also have the grey area of rape in which people can be intoxicated, they can take somebody home, they might not fully understand that they've had sex or they've fully been able to give consent, or there's kind of a grey area where a man has said he has assumed consent and the woman afterwards has said she didn't give it. And then what Shona's raised is a really interesting thing, and as soon as I heard her section, it kind of pinged off in my head, which is that with the rise in things like the manosphere, with the culture that we have, there is a lot of men out there who will proudly put on dating websites that they are dominant, looking for a submissive. And there's a lot of language, particularly in a sexual sphere, where men will talk about what they would like, what kinks they want. And it's all under this caveat of it's their sexual personality, their sexual expression. But often there is this dynamic of wanting women to be submissive to their needs, and there's an element of boundary crossing that is in this really sticky, uncomfortable, disgusting area around rape. I think while not every woman has experienced rape, I think a lot of women, majority of women, could attest to experiencing some very alarming sexual behaviour across their lifespan. I think that while some of us have not experienced sexual assault, we have experienced very unnerving sexual experiences. As women in those situations, it's not something at that moment in time you can do a lot about. I think a lot of women have repressed sexually something that felt very uncomfortable. And I think Shona's example is really clear in that. There is a boundary often that is expressed. Women do express a boundary. They say, this doesn't make me comfortable, or I'm not currently on the pill, or This isn't something I want to do. You know, for example, they mentioned in Shona's experience, she did not want to get pregnant. That has been explicitly said. And like with the other participant, she'd said, you know, I don't want you to touch me. I don't want you to do that. I don't want to have sex right now. It's verbalised. And I think there's this perception that women don't verbalise it and then cry wolf afterwards. Men know that. And then there is this really grey area where men will push boundaries and say that it is a sexual thing, that it's like, oh, I'm just initiating intimacy with you by pushing. Or in the heat of a sexual moment, they might bring in something that was never negotiated before. For example, Shona's example is really clear. Ejaculating without consent. It might be something, for example, like trying to push for anal sex without consent. It might be choking someone during sex without consent. And often it's caveated as, oh, this is a kink of mine and I just wanted to see if you were into it. And, you know, we were in sex, we were in the moment. So therefore it's just me expressing myself sexually. It's what I like. And that is a really disturbing way for men in particular to push rapey behaviours and caveat it as it's just sex. And I think a lot of women have experienced that, where they've then had to suppress because it seems outlandish to say, during sex somebody did this to me and it made me feel uncomfortable. Or even a man tried to do it and I had to stop it, or I had to verbally say many times, pull out, or stop this, or I'm not happy with this. And women carry that shame because you can't tell your friends about that. You can't tell your family about that. That isn't traditional rape and it's not considered it. So I actually think it was really interesting that Shona raised that, because that is a very common issue. This whole debate and this whole Panorama thing has a lot to answer for in terms of like media welfare. That's one whole conversation. Then there's a whole other conversation going on about the complexity of what is rape and what isn't, and particularly for older generations of women, I've found that they have a very strange perception of what is and isn't rape, and cultural and age generations. I will hear women older than myself, older generations, as well as men, saying that what women wear, how they interact on social media, how they portray themselves is an element of asking for it, which again, as a woman, I find really disgusting, and I don't really understand that logic. But then there is this whole other conversation, like in Shona's case, about the kind of violations in your intimate bedroom that is very, very difficult to share. And that I think a huge amount of women have experienced. I wouldn't want to do statistics on it, but I bet so many women will be thinking and listening to her thinking there has been some point in your sexual experiences, in your sexual journey, your life, where you've had a very uncomfortable moment, where something has been pushed or something has happened that you weren't comfortable with. And I think men will not like me saying that. They will not like hearing that. And I understand that. But there is this masculine culture that kind of says that is allowed, that they're a sexual being, or when they're in the sexual moment, they're allowed to be aggressive and expressive and push a boundary for their sexual gratification. But we forget, socially, women have always been treated submissively. Rape has always been questioned. Any nuance around rape is usually disregarded, as in the woman is making it up, which has been apparent in this show. It's just not been dealt with. But women also, they carry the brunt of these things. They are the victims more predominantly of sexual assaults. They are the ones that would get pregnant. They are the ones that would have ramifications from the sexual experience. But I find that a lot of women will feel a lot of shame because they might have even, like in this example with Shona, originally consented to the sex. They might have gone on a date and they might have gone back to theirs. And then something happens like this, where it's like an additional thing that happened with the experience, but you can't tell people about. So you leave the next day feeling shame yourself because this horrible thing happened to you. And it feels icky. And it's not something you can share with people, and it's not rape. Because there was consent, consensual sex. So you can't tell anybody about it. But it sticks with you. It sticks with you, the sense that even in an intimate situation that you have with a person, as a woman, do you ever truly feel safe? I think I can say that there has been, you know, and there are healthy men out there and there's healthy sexual experiences. But I think this is a wider conversation about what men really deem acceptable sexually. And when you've decided to be intimate with a woman, what you think is acceptable behaviour and is not. Because a lot of men might listen to that situation with Shona and say, well, you just got carried away. But it is a direct violation. And it, you know, the amount of times men have said, you can get the morning after pill, or I want to do this, and oh, it was in the heat of the moment, or I'm into that, so that's why I did it. It is reinforcing that patriarchal suppression, sexual deviancy, sexual abuse and assault of women that historically has been going on forever, and making it a kink or seeing it on porn and then wanting to reenact it with somebody. It's perpetuating these really destructive cycles. And I don't think some men are even cognizant that they're doing it, particularly in the example of one of these women. He said, you're making me sound like a rapist, and he was freaking out. Men don't necessarily think what their behaviour is wrong sometimes, and as women, because we carry the shame and we don't communicate it, they just go on and have other experiences. Like, that men might be reflecting now, saying that they've never ever done anything, and they might have been many times when they've made a woman feel violated sexually. So yeah, really, that was the main thing I took away from this, that it's actually raising a much bigger conversation about sex and intimacy and consent in general.